For the beginning of this episode, I want to give a warning. This content in this episode includes topics about loss, mourning, and emotional distress, which may be triggering for individuals who have experienced recent or past bereavement. Listener discretion is advised. You're listening to the Feed the Soul podcast. We're talking about tackling tough stuff, chasing dreams, and figuring out who we really are. Each episode ends with a word of advice or encouragement, a nugget of inspiration to empower you to dream big and take that leap of faith into the wild adventure of life. I wanted to name this episode Serving Grief so you know exactly what was to come, at least in terms of the topic. You know that we're going to be talking about grief today and my story or history and history with grief, and already I'm feeling uncomfortable about it. I wrote a script for this episode because I wasn't sure what would come up for me, and it's totally fine. Like, if I cry or if something emotion does come up for me, like, I'm totally accepting that and okay with that. That's part of this podcast. But I also wanted to have a script in a way to keep me on topic. Grief is one of those subjects like failure. I've battled with it for a long time, and I'm just now at a point and place in my life where I've accepted it more, understand it more, and how it shows up for me, and how to channel and process through it. Yeah, so here we go. I wanted to, in this appetizer as well, just define grief. Now, you may define grief differently. Obviously, it shows up for everyone differently, but this is just one that I got off the webs. Grief is the anguish experienced after significant loss, usually the death of a beloved person. Grief often includes psychological distress, separation anxiety, confusion, yearning, obsessive dwelling on the past, and apprehension about the future. I've had a lot of deaths in my life, from family friends to relatives, and part of me feels disconnected with the emotion of being sad because I was around death so often. At least so it seems. When I reflect back on it, I feel like I was around death a lot. And mostly because, again, family, friends, grew up in the church. Everyone knew everybody. My mom also worked at our high school, so like folks, family, students was in all the time. So we either were like at funerals helping serve food for the most part. That's what it came down to, or helping clean the church in preparation for it. And so the word funeral or death is kind of common for me. I think I felt more sad for others, sympathy, moreover than empathy. At one point, I was afraid of death. I just wasn't sure of what was to come next, what happens after death. That's a topic for another episode. And you may have heard in Serving Intention, I grew up in a Christian household, so basically staying out of hell, going to heaven was the goal. And over time, I realized that death wasn't something to be afraid of. And I think I remember my mom saying that that's not something to be afraid of. Whatever happened next for me happened. And I think I would be pleased. I think I would die pleased, kind of happy with what I've done, what I've accomplished, and who I was for the most part. I remember a couple times when my mom would call me to tell me that someone passed away. Rest in peace to Patricia Myers and to Patty Schmidt, to Grandpa Joe, Papa Joe Kirk. She would call me and tell me that this person passed away. Sometimes it was a shock. Patty Schmidt, for one. Schmidt and Mrs. Myers both had cancer. Actually, my grandpa also had a form of cancer, and they were in hospital. I visited them in hospitals. And so hearing that they passed away wasn't shocking. It wasn't a death that was shocking to me, but they were people in my life that you would expect me to have a reaction. So after she'd tell me, we'd hang up, she'd call me back and say, "How you doing?" She would just check in, which I actually really appreciated because, when you call someone and tell someone that someone just died, like, you are anticipating a reaction, right? And so to call back and check in, just seeing how you're doing, you've had time to process what I've just said. Maybe emotions have come up and memories or feelings. Just want to check in how you're feeling, honestly, right? And for the most part, I would say I'm fine. Yeah, I think I might have shed a tear, but I was like, I'm good. I understand. It wasn't until like the funeral or a visitation when I would see them, that person lying in the casket, lifeless, that it would hit me all at one time. The memories and the times that we had together. I'd cry, but I don't think I would cry for long. Pick your head up, put your mask back on, put the cape back on, and move forward. It was a cycle in life. Sounds pretty awful, doesn't it? But remember, everyone grieves differently, in different ways, and at different times. So let's fast forward to March of 2018. Those other deaths had happened before that, mostly when I was in college. And 2018 was the next death of someone that was like really close to me. And that's when I got the call that my Nana, Helen Moore, had passed away. Years prior to that, she had had a stroke and she needed assistance. She was in a rehabilitation center / nursing home in a wheelchair because her left side had basically been paralyzed. And so I would visit her often over years, taking her down to a movie at the nursing home or taking her to lunch or dinner at the cafeteria, and just to spend some time with her. Again, she wasn't able to roll herself or move herself, and so having someone there to take her was necessary. Weeks up until her death, I feel like many of the family had processed what was happening and what was going to happen. We said our goodbyes many times. If you've ever watched someone die, it's kind of actually hard to explain. You think it's happening, or it's like, this is it. Everyone come, surround, and then you're just there, waiting. And sometimes it never happens. And for Nana, it was like a whole nother week. She was lively again. And we're like, wait, what? What? Okay, great. Let's roll with this. And then you're doing goodbyes again. It was actually kind of hard processing that, going through that. But it did finally happen, and we didn't have to say goodbye again. That was also one of those deaths that my mom definitely called back and was like, "How are you?" And I said, I was sad. I really was. And I think that night I really turned to alcohol. But I also had a dog to pet and love on and to, pour into. Now, this death was different. It was the first asleep body that I observed, that I touched. I remember going to the visitation and we saw her and we was like, why does she have glasses on? I don't think I've ever seen my Nana wear glasses. Let's take that off. Why? It just felt okay to be around. We laughed. Yes, we cried a little. We shared stories, but it was different than any other death that I had experienced and been around. It felt weird in a way, a little abnormal, like I had been missing something, and maybe this is actually how it was supposed to be. This is what a celebration of life means. Celebrate the life of my Nana and cry and laugh and just have a good time knowing that she's no longer battling and fighting. Now, the funeral day was something different. We got to the church and we met as a family. We walked in as a family, sat together as we do, and except for my mom. She sat in the back of the church. And it was also another funeral where we were there. We chuckled a little bit. You know, if you've ever seen those memes, I could tag that person who you know you can't sit next to at a funeral because y'all just be like cracking jokes or laughing. Like, that was my siblings. When in my soul of souls, like in my internal body, I wanted to sob. I wanted to be one of those folks at a funeral just like hunched over, bawling my eyes out because I hadn't done that yet. I don't know, like some before that, maybe, I don't remember, but it was like maybe I didn't need to. But this was the matriarch of our family where we would go and spend holidays with and at her place and together. And I just felt like I needed to cry. And I think part of me also didn't because I never really saw my family do that. My parents, like I mentioned, we wear a cape. We stay strong for others, and we pick our head up and we keep going. That was one time, actually the second time, that I heard my mother crying out loud. And I wanted to. I said, well, no, we got to stay strong for her. This is her mom. And I think I buried that emotion. I buried those feelings for a long time. Fast forward, March of 2018. This is a year later. Oh, no. Sorry. This is 2018 of March is when she passed away. I'm replaying that moment in my head, and here come the emotions. But I buried all of that. We had a celebration of life. I remember I had family coming in from out of town. We stayed at a hotel, and we were up all night in that hotel room talking and spending time together that we hadn't in a while. A year later, so still March of 2019, I posted on Facebook and I said, quote, "Some days I'm in denial. Some days I'm still processing. Some nights I wake up crying. Some nights I can't sleep. But every day I miss you. Love you, Nana." Unquote. Just a couple months before that post, I had a dream. And it's really interesting. Both parents on my mom's side, my Grandpa John and my Grandma Helen, I don't recall my Grandpa Joe ever coming to me in a dream. But my Grandpa John and my Nana both came into a dream of mine shortly after they passed away. And Nana said to me, "It's going to be okay. We don't have to worry." And that was something I thought even before she passed away. I guess it's something that we told her, that we're okay and that she doesn't have to worry. I woke up that night, I don't know, a little sad. This is the first time I've seen her in my dream again. And I went to the couch because I couldn't fall back asleep. And it was on my couch just lying there that the memories flooded back in and stories played in my head, and it all came crashing in at once. All those emotions and feelings that day of the funeral that I just wanted to scream came rushing in all at one time, and I sobbed into a pillow on the couch. The emotions that I buried, the emotions that I avoided knowingly, I sat there at that funeral release it, release it, release it, and I couldn't. It all came rushing in at once, and my body released the anguish. It released the emotional distress and the loss of my grandma. And ever since that day, I've allowed my body to cry more often when it needs to. Whether that's in sadness, whether that's in happiness, whether that's with gratitude and joy, or even confusion, I've learned that it's necessary. The release is necessary. Feeling sad and frightened or lonely is a normal reaction to loss. Crying doesn't mean you are weak. You don't need to protect, and I put protect in quotes. You don't need to protect your family or friends by putting on a brave front. That mask of "I'm strong," the cape of "I will save you and hold you." Showing your true feelings can help them and you. So for dessert, I just wanted to leave some words of wisdom and words of advice for folks who are going through grief, who have had death in the past and haven't allowed yourself to grieve. And you might feel that rock in your pit of your stomach or in your soul, and your inner voice wanting to scream and get it out. This is for you. And for those in the future and moments in the future that may come. Face your feelings. You can try to suppress your grief, but you can't avoid it forever. I tried. In order to heal, you have to acknowledge the pain. Unresolved grief can also lead to complications such as depression and anxiety, substance abuse and health problems, migraines, the weight loss, lack of appetite. It shows up differently in everyone. And again, knowing yourself, talked about this in a previous episode, knowing yourself, you'll notice that things are different in your body, in your life, or in your habits. And maybe you can be able to pinpoint that to grief. Express your feelings in a tangible and creative way. Even if you're not able to talk about your loss with others, it can help to write down your thoughts and feelings in a journal, for example, or in a podcast episode. Try to maintain your hobbies and interests. There's comfort in routine and getting back to the activities that bring you joy and connect you closer to others, can help you come to terms with your loss and aid in the grieving process. Don't let anyone tell you how to feel, and don't tell yourself how to feel either. Your grief is your own, and no one else can tell you when it's time to move on or to get over it. Let yourself feel whatever you feel without embarrassment and without judgment. Embarrassment or judgment for others, but also judgment from yourself. Now, I might be talking to the men out there. I've never seen my dad cry. My dad is also that one person at funerals who is standing at the casket ready to catch the person who's about to fall out, or who wants to just jump into the casket with their loved one. He is there to pick them up and escort them out the church or escort them to their chair instead of being able to grieve as well. And again, we all do it differently and in our own time, but also realizing that it shows up in other ways. And also realizing that people are watching. Like, I grew up thinking like this is how I should grieve as well. Don't judge yourself for crying. Let it happen. Let it go. Even if that is in the comfort of your own room, I guess, let it go. I would have liked to see that, though. Just as a man, to see another man like in my life cry, to be like, yeah, it's okay. I learned later that it's okay and it's fine, and that's maybe toxic masculinity, but growing up would have been pretty cool. Lastly, look after your physical health. The mind and the body are connected. When you feel healthy physically, you'll be able to cope emotionally. Combat stress and fatigue by getting enough sleep, by eating right, and exercising. Again, our body and our mind are connected, and when we know ourselves, we know when something's off. The final sip is to let it happen in its time. And you'll learn what it is. If you are feeling like you haven't been able to grieve, or you want to grieve, or maybe you're just feeling like life is tough right now and that you're struggling, and maybe you're like me, like where you're not afraid of death, maybe in a different light where I'm just going to put it blankly and frankly, like where you want to take your own life, call or text 988. That is for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Please talk to someone, talk to a friend, talk to a loved one that you trust, and get it off your chest. Get it off your chest. Find a grieving community, an outlet and group to help you through this process. As always, remember that to the world, you may feel like just one person or nobody, but to one person, you may be the world. You are loved, and go in peace.